A driver's license is required in Australia before a person is permitted to drive a motor vehicle of any description on a road in Australia. The responsibility for the regulation and enforcement of road use, including light vehicle driver licensing, is the responsibility of the state and territory governments. Classes of licenses. All states and territories in Australia have a uniform driver licence system. The medical standards for drivers of commercial vehicles are set by the National Transport Commission and Austroads. The driver of a vehicle carrying paying passengers is required to hold a driver licence depending on the size of the vehicle, as well as a public passenger vehicle driver authority, which is issued by the state or territory Ministry of Transport. Car licences are Euro rules by jurisdiction. Terms. The official nomenclature for car licenses varies in the states and territories, for example driver's license, or driver license. However, driver's license is most commonly used. The official names for learners also vary, for example learner driver licenses, or learner's permit. Driving age. The minimum driving age varies between states and territories. It is 18 years in Victoria, 16 years and 6 months in the Northern Territory, 16 years in South Australia and 17 years in the other states and the ACT. Learner drivers may drive, under qualified supervision, from 15 years and 9 months in the ACT and 16 years in the other states and the Northern Territory. Australian Capital Territory. The driving age in the Australian Capital Territory is 17 years. After obtaining a licence, a driver continues to be subject to restrictions during a 3-year probationary period. Learner licence. The minimum age for obtaining a learner licence is 15 years and 9 months. The applicant must complete a road safety program Road Ready that is taught in many secondary schools or at a Road Ready centre and pass a computerised road rules test before obtaining a learner licence. This licence is valid for 2 years. Learners must display black on yellow L plates, and drive under the supervision of a full Australian licence holder, who has held their licence for at least 4 years. Provisional licence. Provisional licence. The applicants must be at least 17 years of age, held a learner licence for a minimum of 6 months, recorded driving experience, a learner logbook with a supervisor who has held an open licence for 12 months for the class of vehicle used, or an accredited driving instructor, or has passed a practical driving test. The provisional licence is valid for 3 years. Provisional drivers must display red on white P plates for 3 years unless they take an additional road safety program Road Ready Plus after 6 months of obtaining their provisional licence. Or they are over 26 years of age and held their licence for 6 months. Provisional holders who have taken the RRP course or are over 26 years of age also get an additional 4 demerit point allowance. Provisional drivers must have a 0 blood alcohol limit. Full licence. A full licence is upgradable after holding a provisional licence for 3 years. New South Wales. The minimum driving age in New South Wales is 16 years. The government introduced the graduated licensing scheme in 2000 and therefore learners progress from a learner licence, to a provisional P1 licence, to a provisional P2 licence and finally to a full licence over an extended period of time. After obtaining a licence, a driver continues to be subject to restrictions during a 3-year probationary period. Learner licence. A learner licence is gained after the minimum driving age of 16 is met. Passing a touchscreen computer-based test driver knowledge test. Provide identification. And pass an eyesight test. Learners are permitted to drive accompanied by a supervising unrestricted license holder. Learners are subject to numerous restrictions, a maximum speed of 90 km per hour. A 0 blood alcohol content limit. Cannot tow a trailer. And must conspicuously display black on yellow L plates on the exterior of the vehicle while driving. Learners must complete at least 120 hours of driving practice including 20 hours of night driving and hold the learner license for at least 12 months before a provisional P1 license is issued. Since December 16, 2009, 1 hour with an instructor is equal to 3 hours of normal driving hours until a total of 10 hours with an instructor. This equates to a maximum of 30 hours which can be accumulated at an advanced rate. Since December 19, 2009, learner drivers 25 years old and over are not required to complete a learner driver logbook and are exempt from the 12-month tenure. Provisional P1 license. A provisional P1 license is gained after a minimum 12 months of holding a learner license, 120 hours of on-road driving experience, and pass a driving test. The license holder can drive unaccompanied but is limited to a maximum speed of 90 km per hour, towing trailers of up to 250 kg and a zero alcohol content. Red on white P plates must be displayed while driving. P1 drivers are limited to a total of 4 demerit points during the term of the license, as compared to the 13-point limit on unrestricted licenses. P1 drivers must hold the license for 1 year before progressing to the next stage. In New South Wales, the minimum age to be eligible for a provisional P1 license is 17. As of July 1, 2007, new laws for P1 drivers have been introduced, including a limit of 1 passenger under the age of 21 between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., and instant suspension for 3 months for any speeding offence. Furthermore, it is also now a requirement that red P plates be displayed on the outside of the vehicle. Provisional P2 license. A provisional P2 license is gained after 1 year and successful completion of a computerized hazard perception test. The driver is restricted to a speed limit of 100 km per hour, a zero alcohol limit and a maximum of 7 demerit points. However, they are eligible to upgrade the class of their license, such as those for heavier vehicles. P2 drivers must conspicuously display a green on white P plate on the exterior of the vehicle at all times. P2 drivers must hold the license for 2 years before progressing to the next stage. Full license. A full, unrestricted license is gained after 2 years and successful completion of another computerized test. Unrestricted driver's licenses are colored gold. Northern Territory the learner license may be obtained at age 16. Learner drivers may not use a mobile phone and must be supervised by a full license holder and may not drive faster than 80 km per hour. After holding the learner license for 6 months, a provisional license may be obtained. Once the provisional license is obtained, it must be held for a minimum of 2 years before obtaining the full Northern Territory license. Provisional license. You will need to hold your provisional license for a minimum of 2 years before you progress to an open license. Now that you have your provisional license, you still need to comply with all road rules and traffic laws, and there are some additional requirements for provisional license holders, including speed. You may not exceed 100 km per hour, irrespective of the sign-posted speed limit. Alcohol. You must have a zero blood alcohol concentration at all times whilst driving. Displaying P plates. You must display approved P plates that are clearly visible to the front and rear of the vehicle you are driving and must not obstruct your vision while driving. P plates must have the letter par unregistered trademark in red on a white background. The plate must be a minimum of 150 mm wide and 150 mm tall. P plates must not be displayed when the person driving the vehicle is not a provisional driver so make sure you remember to display and then remove your P plates from the vehicle when you start and finish driving. Mobile phones and other devices. Provisional drivers are not permitted to use a mobile phone in any form whilst driving, including hands-free devices and texting. Demerit points. Accumulating 5 or more demerit points within a 12-month period will trigger action against your provisional license. Source: Northern Territory Department of Transport. Queensland Learner's License. Persons 6 may apply for their learner license at 16 years of age, passing a written road rules test. Learners under 25 must hold their license for at least 1 year and log a total of 100 hours on road driving experience in the issued logbook. However, a logbook exemption can be applied for, meaning the learner will not need to submit a logbook with 100 hours of driving, but will need to hold their learner license for a minimum of 12 months before going for their provisional license. Learners over 25 years of age are not required to complete a logbook of 100 logged driving hours, however may voluntarily wish to do so. Learners must display yellow L plates and are not speed restricted by the license. Learners must be accompanied by an open license holder who has held the relevant class open license for at least 1 year. The drinking level must be 0.00 for a learner and instructor must be under 0.049. Provisional License 1. P1 is a transitional license for applicants 25 years old or younger. Applicants must be at least 17 years of age, held a learner license for a minimum of 12 months, recorded a minimum of 100 hours driving experience in the learner logbook with a supervisor who has held an open license for 12 months for the class of vehicle used or an accredited driving instructor, and has passed a practical driving test. P1 drivers must at all times display red P plates. P1 license holders may upgrade to P2 licenses after holding their P1 licenses for 1 year and passing the hazard perception test. There are restrictions to the power of the vehicles and the number of passengers allowed in relation to P1 drivers. Drivers over 25 years of age who successfully pass their practical driving test are able to skip the P1 license stage and progress directly to the P2 license stage. Provisional License 2. If not upgraded from P1, applicants must have held a learner license for a minimum of 12 months. P2 drivers must display green P plates. P2 license holders may upgrade to an open license after holding their P2 license for 2 years. As with P1 licenses, there are restrictions to power and passengers but they are less restrictive than P1 licenses. Driver license. The Queensland Government is replacing the current laminate driver licence and heavy vehicle driver licence with a more secure, durable and reliable licence. All licensing and personal information that is currently on the face of the laminated licence will remain on the face of the new card, and one's address will be shown on the back. From 2005, Queensland licences have been called a driver licence, and no longer carry information about the holder's organ donor status. The Australian Organ Donor Register is now used for national registration of tissue donation status. Elderly drivers are required to have their licenses renewed more often and are required to have compulsory eye tests, which does not include colour vision. For more information on driver's licences in Queensland, see Department of Transport and Main Roads and click on Licensing. Work Licence. A Queensland driver charged with a drink driving offence may be entitled to apply for a work licence that if granted by a magistrate's court would entitle the driver to drive for work purposes whilst their licence is suspended. See http://www.drivinglaw.com or Work Licences HTML, UD Class Licence. Queensland had a special Class UD licence which allows operation of heavy agricultural or purpose-built vehicles without an MC or HC licence. No new licences of this type will be issued after January 1, 2014, but existing licences remain valid. South Australia Learner's Permit. A person who is at least 16 may apply for a learner's permit in South Australia. Applicants must pass a theory test to obtain a driving permit. A learner driver must always be accompanied by a qualified supervising driver. Learners must display yellow L plates, and may not have a blood alcohol content greater than 0 and must not accumulate more than 4 Demerit Points. Learner drivers are allowed to travel at a maximum speed of 100 km per hour, even where the posted speed limit is higher. Learner drivers are permitted to tow a single trailer. Provisional License. To get a provisional license, you must have held a learner's permit for at least 12 months, be at least 17 years of age or have an equivalent interstate or overseas driver's license and be at least 17. If you had a learner's permit, you must also have a logbook showing you have had at least 75 hours driving experience which must have all been signed by the qualified supervising driver. All applicants must pass a practical driving test or be signed off on several points by a driving instructor in a competency-based training course. Drivers are then issued with a P1 license. The main restrictions on P-platters are a maximum speed limit of 100 km per hour, a requirement that no alcohol or party drugs be in the system, and not being allowed to accrue more than 4 demerit points. They must also display red P plates. Drivers who obtain a P1 provisional license on or after September 4, 2010 must not drive a high-powered vehicle if they are under the age of 25. High-powered includes vehicles with engines of 8 or more cylinders, vehicles with turbocharged or supercharged engines, vehicles that have been modified to increase engine performance, and nominated high-performance vehicles. High-powered vehicle restrictions do not apply to drivers over 25 years of age. P plates of any kind are not displayed when on the P2 license. A driver must have held a provisional license for at least 2 years and a P2 license for at least 6 months before becoming a fully licensed driver. Fully licensed drivers have their restrictions on alcohol relaxed to 0.05% blood alcohol concentration and may drive at the full speed limit. Tasmania learner. A learner license for cars may be obtained after reaching age 16. A person holding a learner license may not exceed 80 km per hour in speed or tow a trailer or boat, and may only drive with a BAC of 0. L plates must be displayed, and a supervisory driver with a full license must sit in the front passenger seat. The supervisory driver must not have any periods of suspension or disqualification within the last 2 years. As of April 2009, there are separate L1 and L2 stages. After 3 months a learner can go for a practical driving test. This test proves the driver can drive safely. This test can be undertaken in an automatic or manual vehicle. If the L2's test was undertaken in an automatic vehicle, the learner can still go for their manual license when they undertake the P's test. Once a learner is on their L2s, they begin logging their driving hours. A learner must complete 50 hours of driving and must be of the age of 17 before they can take the practical driving test. This test contains several sections including the I left something behind task. If the learner fails the test, he/she must wait 28 days before retaking the test. As of March 2, 2015, L2 drivers have new speed restrictions in which they can drive at 90 km per hour in a 90 or 100 zone and at 100 km per hour in a 110 zone. P1. A P1 license may be issued after reaching age 17, logging 50 practice hours, holding an L2 license for 9 months, and passing a practical driving test. A P1 license is issued for 1 year. P1 drivers must remain under 80 km per hour, have a 0 BAC while driving, and display P plates. Provisional drivers may tow other vehicles. As of March 2, 2015, P1 drivers have new speed restrictions in which they can drive at 90 km per hour in a 90 or 100 zone and at 100 km per hour in a 110 zone. After 12 months, the license converts to a P2 license. P2 drivers may drive above 80 km per hour provided they don't exceed the speed limit, and do not have to display P plates. They must have a BAC limit of 0 to drive, and the license will be suspended if 4 demerit points are accumulated, contrasted with 12 for full license holders. Drivers must hold the P2 license for between 12 months and 2 years, depending on their age, to be issued a full license. Note: there are no vehicle restrictions in Tasmania. Victoria VicRoads is the authority in Victoria responsible for the administration of driver licensing in the state. The minimum driving age in Victoria is 18 years. A learner can drive at the age of 16 under the supervision of a fully licensed driver. After obtaining a license, a driver continues to be subject to restrictions during a 4-year probationary period. Learner's permit. A learner's permit may be obtained by a person over 16 years. The applicant must pass a computerized knowledge test and an eyesight test. Learner drivers must not consume any alcohol before driving, must be 0, and must be accompanied by a driver who holds a full driver license and has a BAC below 0.05%. A Victorian learner's permit is valid for 10 years from date of issue. L plates must be displayed while driving, and must not tow a trailer. There are no special speed or vehicle restrictions. P1 probationary license. A P1 probationary driver license holder must be over 18 years of age and pass a computerized hazard perception test, a practical driving test and an eyesight test. P1 drivers must display white on red P plates. An applicant for a driver license must have held a learner's permit for at least 12 months if the applicant is under 21 years at the time of applying. 6 months if the applicant is between 21 and 24 years. And 3 months for applicants aged over 25 years. If a driver obtained their learner's permit after July 1, 2007, and are under 21 years of age, they must have logged 120 hours of practice. Probationary drivers must drive with a 0 BAC, and are not permitted to drive high-powered vehicles. If the driver was tested in an automatic vehicle, then they must not drive a manual vehicle. There are no speed restrictions, however trailers may not be towed except for work purposes. P1 drivers have a peer passenger restriction which sees P1 drivers only able to carry no more than one passenger aged between 16 and 21 years old at any time. They must not use any form of mobile phone including hands-free. On July 1, 2008, what is considered a high-power vehicle was redefined. P-plate drivers were no longer allowed to drive cars with engines larger than a V6, cars that have a turbo or supercharger. A short list was produced of cars that comply with these restrictions but are still considered powerful and therefore banned. The list includes BMW M3 and Porsche 911. There have been many complaints about this system as several slower cars have been banned, such as the Peugeot 308, but faster cars such as VW Golf R32 and BMW 130i were still permitted. On July 1, 2014, the rules were again modified, to distinguish between vehicles manufactured before January 1, 2010, and those manufactured after. Probationary drivers are now permitted to drive any vehicle manufactured after January 1, 2010 that does not have a power-to-mass ratio of greater than 130 kilowatts per ton, and does not have a modified engine for increased performance. Vehicles manufactured before January 1, 2010 remain subject to previous restrictions, which include a restriction on engines larger than a V6, and cars that have a turbocharger or supercharger. After July 1, 2008, those aged over 21 years when applying for a license qualify as P2 drivers after passing the computerized hazard perception test and a practical driving test, as well as an eyesight test. P2 probationary license. The P2 probationary driver license came into effect from July 1, 2008. For probationary drivers obtaining a P1 probationary license after that date, their license status will progress to a P2 license automatically provided they have had a good driving record for at least 12 months while holding the P1 license. The same P1 restrictions apply, except P2 drivers may tow trailers. As of November 25, 2013, P2 drivers must not use a mobile phone while driving, including hands-free phones. The peer passenger restriction does not apply to P2 drivers. They must display the white on green P plates, rather than the red. If a person is over 21 when licensed they go straight onto the P2 license for 3 years. P2 licenses last for 3 years, making the minimum age of receiving a full license 22 years, up from 21 years for drivers who obtained their probationary license before July 1, 2008. The minimum age for obtaining a P2 license is 19 years. All drivers who obtained their probationary license before July 1, 2008 qualify as P2 drivers and must display the green P plates. Driver license. A full driver license is obtained after the probationary period. For drivers who obtained their probationary driver license after July 1, 2008, the minimum age at which they can obtain their full driver license is 22, unless they already have an interstate or New Zealand probationary license, and move to Victoria, in which case they can be 21. This is an irregularity that can allow interstate and New Zealand drivers to obtain their full license 1 year ahead of residential Victorians. There are few restrictions on fully licensed drivers, other than not being able to drive while holding a mobile phone, and the requirement to have a BAC under 0.05%. Full licenses are valid for 10 years, but can be made available for 3 years if requested. For more information on driver's licenses in Victoria, see Arrive Alive website. Western Australia Driver's licenses in Western Australia are administered by the Department of Transport. The driving age in Western Australia is 17 years. A learner can drive at the age of 16 under the supervision of a fully licensed driver. After obtaining a license, a driver continues to be subject to restrictions during a 2-year probationary period. Phase 1 Learner's Permit. A Phase 1 learner's permit to drive a car in Western Australia can be gained by anyone aged 16 or over after successfully passing a computer-based driving theory test and an eyesight test. Drivers with learner's permits may only drive whilst accompanied by either a qualified driving instructor or a person who has held a valid licence of the same type as the permit for 4 years. Learner drivers must display black on yellow L plates, and must not drive with a blood alcohol content exceeding 0.00%. Learner's permits expire after 3 years. After a recent bill passed through Parliament, Phase 1 drivers are now permitted to drive on Perth freeways as well as other roads outside the boundaries of Kings Park. Phase 2 Learner's Permit. A Phase 2 learner's permit is awarded to those Phase 1 learners who pass a practical driving test accompanied by an examiner employed by the government. Only those aged 16 years and 6 months or older are permitted to undergo the practical assessment. Successful drivers are presented with a logbook, in which they must record subsequent driving experience and conditions. If the test is passed in an automatic transmission vehicle, the driver will be given a CA license class and is restricted to driving automatic vehicles. To receive a C license, the test must be passed in a manual vehicle. The driver can then drive either transmission. Phase 2 learner drivers are permitted to drive on Perth freeways, however they must still be accompanied by an experienced driver whenever they drive and the other restrictions continue to apply. The driver also has a 6-month mandatory waiting period before they can sit the hazard perception test to get their provisional license. Provisional license. A provisional license is awarded when learner drivers aged 17 years or over complete 25 hours of driving experience in their logbook and pass a computerized hazard perception test. Drivers with provisional licenses must display white on red P plates whenever they drive within the first 6 months, can drive unaccompanied but cannot drive with a blood alcohol content over 0.00%. They are not allowed to drive between 12 am and 5 am unless driving to and from place of work or study. For last 18 months, provisionally licensed drivers must display white on green P plates and cannot drive with a blood alcohol content over 0.00%. Graduated Demerit Points. As of December 1, 2010, the Western Australian Government introduced a new graduated Demerit Point system for novice drivers. Under this system, a driver may accrue less than 4 demerit points within the first year of their provisional license, and less than 8 points within the second year, before losing their license. These limits include demerit points accrued before these 1- and 2-year periods, such as any accrued while on a learner's permit. Full driver's license. The provisional license automatically converts into a full driver's license after the 2-year probationary period. Drivers with full driver's licenses must drive with a blood alcohol content less than 0.05%, may accrue less than 12 demerit points before being disqualified, and may drive at up to 110 km per hour. P-plate drivers may also drive up to 110 km/h, where permitted by the state. WA has 2 classes of driver's license, C which enables one to drive any vehicle weighing less than 4.5 tons, CA which enables one to drive any vehicle fitted with an automatic transmission and weighing less than 4.5 tons. Refer. Double or nothing. Drivers who have accrued 12 or more demerit points can choose to continue driving on a 12-month good behavior period. If more than 2 demerit points are accrued during the 12-month period, the license is lost for twice the original disqualification period. Usually 6 months. General, tourists and visitors staying less than 3 months are permitted to drive using their home country license. If the license is not written in English, then an acceptable translation of the license must be carried at all times. Visitors staying more than 3 months must apply for a license in the state in which they reside. Licenses and photo cards are hologrammed, and contain a photograph, signature, and the holder's address. In some states, they also show organ donor status. In Australia, where there is no national identity card in operation, driver's licenses serve as the primary means of photo identification. Proof of age cards are available for non-drivers. In New South Wales, these were replaced by the NSW photo card in December 2005 and Western Australia did the same in 2014. Tasmania calls their equivalent card a personal information card. These may be used for entry to venues which have age restrictions, such as alcohol selling premises. The Road and Traffic Authority of New South Wales, AA Euro Demonstration Euro Unregistered Trademark Driver Knowledge Test for Learner Drivers, Road Users Handbooks, Handbook Summaries and Practice Tests for all NSW license tests, Interactive Driver Knowledge Test. Interstate travel. Interstate visitors are permitted to travel on their current Australian or New Zealand licence. They must obey the local road rules of that state. The differences in state laws have generated much confusion to visiting drivers, with many pushing for uniform federal road rules. Drivers who move interstate must apply for a new driver's license within 3 months of moving. Unless a driving test is required, there is no charge for a conversion from a current interstate license. Usually, licenses are converted in the same day, to the same or equivalent class, or, in the case of the conversion of a non-GLS license to a GLS system, a P1 or P2 license is issued, depending on the length of time that the holder of the license has been driving. The license may need to be confirmed by obtaining a letter from the Interstate License Issuing Authority confirming the license details and status. Drivers moving states may be eligible to upgrade their license class, due to the varying age rules that apply in each state. For example, a Victorian learner driver who moves to NSW may be eligible to sit the driving test to obtain a P1 license. However, drivers who are under 18 will not be able to obtain the same license class in Victoria, where one must be at least 18 to do so. Another example is a Victorian over 25 moving to Tasmania, SA, QLD or WA will be able to obtain a full license after having held their PS for 12 months in Victoria despite the fact that the probationary period for over 21-year-olds in Victoria is 3 years. If a driver is about to lose their license in their home state, they may obtain a new license in another state of Australia, provided that the demerit points have not already been deducted and the fine has not yet been paid, or in the case of immediate license disqualification, the actual disqualification period has not yet commenced. See also, Points System Australia. References. External links, South Australia Department for Transport.